Today we're going to do the sonnet that we have really waited for all these days. So we'll read the sonnet once. Everybody has the sonnet with them, right? The Divine Worker. I face earth's happenings with an equal soul. In all are heard thy steps, thy unseen feet tread destiny's pathways in my front. Life's whole tremendous theorem is thou complete. No danger can perturb my spirit's calm. My acts are thine. I do thy works and pass. Failure is cradled on thy deathless arm. Victory is thy passage, mirrored in fortune's glass. In this rude combat with the fate of man, thy smile within my heart makes all my strength. Thy force in me labors at its grandiose plan, indifferent to the time snake's crawling length. No power can slay my soul, it lives in thee. Thy presence is my immortality. So this sonnet clearly falls in the category of someone who's realized, someone who is a sthita pragya, someone who has crossed over, who has reached the state of prapti. It describes the spiritual state of consciousness of someone who does not fluctuate, who is not subject to vicissitudes, the ups and downs of life. Someone who has gone beyond his ego and is now working with perfect transparency, only as an instrument in the hands of God, the divine worker, whose work is divine, who is doing the work of the divine, and he's only an instrument of the divine's work. Now, this state of consciousness, of the dropping off of the ego, and yet engaging in action, not becoming actionless, that is possible only when five renunciations have been accomplished by us. 5 renunciations. First renunciation, everybody knows. Tell me, which is the first renunciation of Karma Yoga? Who would like to tell me?
Desire for fruit.
Yes.
Offering everything. Yeah.
Yes, desire. It is not the desire actually. See, the word is कर्मण्येवाधिकारस्ते. अधिकार word आ रहा है. कर्मण्येवाधिकारस्ते na faleshu kadachana. Mane, I have adhikar on the work that I am doing, but I do not have adhikar on the result of the action that I do. Right? So the first renunciation is renunciation of ownership of the fruit or the attachment to the result of action. Because mere paas adhikar at the first stage, adhikar hai, I have the ownership of action, but not ownership of the fruit that will result from that action. Right? This is the first renunciation. The second renunciation. The second renunciation is the renunciation of the sense of doership. First, we are able to give up the fruit because we realize that we don't have ownership of it. The second renunciation is the renunciation of the sense of doership. Now, this doership also has 2 dimensions. And this all we are going according to the Gita. In the Gita, it says, no, that one feels that ultimately, this is, now I'm telling you the 2 dimensions of the renunciation of the sense of doership. The first stage of renunciation of sense of doership is that all is being done by Prakriti. Prakriti yanti bhutani nigraha kim karishyasi. Everything is being done by Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. So what are you trying to control? You can't control anything. This is the first level of renunciation of the sense of doership. But when you reach a higher level of renunciation of the sense of doership, then one realizes that it's not only Prakriti, because even Prakriti is being used by the supreme power, supreme Shakti herself. So the renunciation of the sense of doership is the second renunciation. Now, what is the third renunciation? The third renunciation is the renunciation of the belief that I am the chosen instrument. I have been chosen by the divine. You know, that pride of worthiness. God has chosen me for doing this. You know, in the ashram, there was a person, and he did fantastic work for the ashram, no doubt. But this sense of worthiness was so much in him that he had a huge ego about it. And he used to tell everybody that, Are, you had to take permission from the mother to become an ashramite. But I was called by the mother herself. So that ego that comes in, that spoils everything. Whatever you may have done, whatever work you may have done, but if there is ego, then that if there is that sense of worthiness that I am a very worthy performer of the divine's actions, you've already spoiled it. So that's the third renunciation. First is the renunciation of the fruit of action. Second is the renunciation of doership, because one realizes that the action is being done by the Supreme Himself. First, one realizes that the action is done by the different, by Prakriti, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. But as one grows in this field, one starts realizing that the action is done by the Supreme Shakti herself. Then the third is renunciation of the sense of worthiness. Oh, I have been chosen. I am doing this. I am so worthy because I have been chosen for God's action. The fourth is renunciation of the preference for any particular kind of action. Now, our Swadharma is to discover our Swabhava. But to discover our Swabhava is not an easy job. What is my real Swabhava? What have I been programmed to really do? And why are we not able to find our real Swabhava? Because of the predominance of ego in us, intellectual ambitiousness. And that is why we are not able to really assess ourselves. What is my real Swabhava? For example, even Adi Shankara said that Maya has very powerful weapons, very powerful weapons. For example, somebody who's doing Gyan Dan, somebody who's leading people to some kind of enlightenment or spreading enlightenment. It's very easy to get into the trap of ego. Are, I am spreading enlightenment. Forgetting that you are nothing, nothing at all. It's the divine who has chosen you today. He can drop you the next day. So it is the divine who's doing it. There is no worthiness in the person who's spreading it, or somebody who's doing dan, who's doing a lot of social service in some manner. This trap of Maya is able to completely cover the higher mind, and one may lose oneself in that ego. So the sense of worthiness has to go, and then the sense that I would like to choose the work that I'm doing. Then the fifth renunciation, and probably the hardest of all, is the renunciation of action itself. Now, this also can be.
One, na? Sorry.
Huh?
Now, don't we come to the fourth?
Fourth one we said is renunciation of preference for any particular action.
Okay, I thought that was third. Okay.
No. The third was the renunciation of the sense of worthiness.
अच्छा, I thought you said कि वो doership में दो आते हैं.
Doership में जो दो आते हैं वो दो ये हैं. First is that one feels at the lower level, one feels
अच्छा,
that
okay.
Prakriti is doing it. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas are doing it. But as one goes to a higher level, one realizes that Prakriti is only a tool.
Yeah.
Actually, it is the Supreme Shakti who's doing it.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
That was the second.
Yeah.
The third was the sense of worthiness.
Yeah.
The fourth was a preference that मैं यही करूंगी, मैं वो नहीं करूंगी. In fact, Aurobindo once said that I can do the work of a carpenter or plumber with the same kind of equanimity that I'm doing in giving reply, in writing letters of reply to the sadhaks, or writing these books altogether, writing 7 books at the same time. He said, for me, it doesn't matter which work is being done by me. You can assign me any job and I'll do it with equanimity. Yeah. And the fifth is the renunciation of action itself. You know, when Gandhi ji wrote the translation of the Bhagavad Gita, he was 40 years old. Yeah. And he felt that he had understood the Gita very well. At 60, he got chickenpox. When he got chickenpox, he was quarantined. In quarantine, he could not do what he was regularly doing. That is, writing letters to people, communicating with people, doing his Ram Dhun, Hari Dhun that he used to be singing, his Charkha, all the different works that he was doing normally were all taken away from him during the quarantine. After the quarantine, he said that I did translate the Gita when I was 40, but to understand actionlessness, I understood now. At the age of 60, when I was really taken, all action was taken away from him. So he said, I have learned the meaning of actionlessness, and now at this age. So one cannot be attached to any work. You know how we get attached to our work. I could get attached to the work that I'm doing in the school. You could get attached to the work you're doing in your office. But one has to be able to be in a state where the divine is using me to run the school, or you running the office, or whatever other work we are doing. But we become a kind of passive only to the divine. One should never be passive to anybody else, but towards the divine we should be passive, that use me. And that leads us to the first reference. It's a very beautiful poem. I think everybody should try and read it on their own. One should read Sri Aurobindo's poem. It's a longer poem, it's not a sonnet. The Trance of Waiting, which describes the state of the yogi when he's not busy in work and he's just waiting silently for the divine to send the work to him. He says, wings that are brilliant with fate sleep at eternity's gate. So the wings that are brilliant with fate, wings of the action, the man who's going to be doing the action. They are brilliant, but they wait at eternity's gate. Eternity's gate means they wait for the divine. That the divine, when he tells me what work is to be done, I will do it. And until then, I will wait. There is no rush, no anxiety about work, and yet so much work. So yeah, these are the 5 renunciations. Now you see, Sri Aurobindo's philosophy is a little different from the earlier Vedic philosophy, in that he believed that a higher consciousness would actually come down, and it actually happened. He called it the Gnostic being, the supramental consciousness, and it actually came down in 1956. And he said very clearly that the children who are born after 1956 will be very, very different from anybody born before 1956. There would be a qualitative change. So his philosophy does not work on only a quantitative change of numbers, that so many people will be realized and so many will be left unrealized. He talked about a qualitative change. So the Vedic rishis actually, they ascended. They did ascend to great heights. Look at the Vedic poetry. They reached the higher realms, and they established themselves there. Then Sri Aurobindo came and he said that that qualitative change will come about. A transformation will happen in the earth consciousness. And for that to happen, the supramental itself will come down on earth, and that will raise the level of consciousness. So from right now we are going through the ups and downs, we go through trials and errors and stumbles and setbacks. And he said that once a supramental consciousness comes, then the people will be moving from knowledge to greater knowledge, to greater knowledge, to greater knowledge. So this paradigm of moving from one level to another level is so alien to our present normal understanding that we cannot fathom it. We cannot estimate how that new consciousness will work. For instance, if an animal were told to understand how Einstein's mind evolved the theory of relativity, how would an animal understand it? See, the gap is so large. So, this is the gap that separates the supramental consciousness from the present mental consciousness in which we are. That is the gap. It is such a big gap. Coming back to Karma Yoga, we will do two references from the Bhagavad Gita on Karma Yoga and understand Karma Yoga just a little bit before we actually move into the sonnet, the divine worker. Tapasvibhyo dhiko yogi jnanebhyo pimato dhikah karmebhyash, it's not clear, karmebhyashchadhiko yogi tasmad yogi bhava Arjuna. So the karma yogi, whenever Sri Aurobindo uses the word yogi in the Bhagavad Gita, whenever Sri Krishna uses the word yogi in the Gita, Sri Aurobindo says that Sri Krishna means the karma yogi. So let us read it like that. He says the karma yogin is greater than the doers of ascesis. Ascesis means tapasya, sacrifice. So the karma yogi is greater than the doers of tapasya, greater than doers of ascesis, sacrifice. The karma yogi is greater than the man of knowledge. He is greater than the man of works. Become then the yogin, O Arjuna. See, now we may say he's saying men of works because there is a difference between doing works and doing works as yoga and becoming a karma yogin. So he says the karma yogin is greater than the people who do sacrifice, who do ascesis, tapasya. The karma yogin is greater than the person who's going into knowledge. The karma yogin is greater than the person who's doing work. Because the one who does work is not necessarily doing karma yoga. He has not necessarily turned his work into a yoga by connecting his work to the divine and by offering to the divine all the work that he does. He has not yet done it. So he's just the man of works, not the man of karma yoga. So then there's one more reference now. No, later. So he says, yeah, there is reference 3, please. Name parthasti kartavyam trishu lokeshu kinchana nanavaptam avaptavyam varta evacha karmani. He says, Sri Krishna says to Arjun, O son of Pritha, I have no work that I need to do in all the 3 worlds. I have nothing that I have not gained. I have nothing that I have yet to gain. And I abide verily in the paths of action. That I have nothing to gain, there is nothing left for me to gain. I have no work that I am obliged to do. And yet, I abide in the path of action. Varta eva cha karmani. Eva implies that I abide in it. I do not leave it, as the sannyasin thinks himself bound to abandon works. There's just one more reference 4, to understand the importance of work. Yadu atmaratihi eva syat atmatriptah cha manavah atmanyeva cha santushtah tasya karyam na vidyate. The person who is satisfied within his soul, the man whose delight is in the self, who's satisfied with the enjoyment of the self, and in the self he is content, for him there exists no work that needs to be done. This is the state of Sri Krishna. He says, I don't need to do any work. I'm content. And that what Sri Krishna means is that just like for God, there is no obligatory action. Similarly, for the yogi who has become a divine worker, for the yogi who is doing the works of the divine, there is no obligatory action. Sri Krishna says that though he has no obligation, yet he remains engaged in action. So one would wonder, why does he then remain active? Actually, this is the state in which a yogi is. That though there is no profit or loss for him, yet he remains engaged in which action? In that action that the divine has willed for him. But since the divine acts out of a consciousness of freedom, so once a person becomes a yogi, then he too acts out of absolute freedom, complete freedom. There is no sense of compulsion for the yogi to do this action or that action. It is done out of a free choice, or rather as a will from the divine. He has reached his svabhava. So this was the little introduction that I needed to give to get us into the groove, into the mood of Karma Yoga before we begin this beautiful poem. So if there are any questions, I'll take the questions and then we'll start the poem.
Anjali, when you talked about
Yes.
these 5 renunciations layers, isn't these actually
Yeah.
5 layers of ego that one has to keep dropping off?
There are many ways of looking at it, Geeta. And we can say that these are layers of ego because ego is a real problem between us and between us as we are and us becoming the divine worker. It is the layers of ego that have to be shared. So if we even look at the first one is renunciation of the
Enjoyership.
belief that I own the result. So that is my ego that wants to actually orchestrate the result. But it doesn't happen like that. And even if it, I mean, one should not leave it because I'm not able to orchestrate the result. One should actually give up the ownership of the result or hankering after the result or the anxiety after result, because that result belongs to the divine. Isha vasyamidam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat. It belongs to the divine. The result doesn't belong to me. That is a spiritual state of consciousness. So one may say it's because of the ego, because ego is also there, but there are other problems also. There is a problem of desire. Now, there are many other problems. When I don't get the result that I wanted, there is anger, there is disgust, there is frustration. Now, so most of it is of course due to ego, no doubt about it. And then the second one, the sense of doership, of course, that also comes out of ego. Then the sense of worthiness also comes out of ego. So ego is one of our greatest enemies. महिषासुर मर्दिनी और किसका किसका मर्दन करती है शक्ति? It is our ego and our desires. They are the two main rakshasas inside us. And उनको अगर हम, if we keep pampering them, keep feeding them, and live from the realization of the soul, है ना? So you are right. That's basically it's layers and layers and layers and layers of ego which veil our inner soul from us. I face earth's happenings with an equal soul. Now, this is what the Gita says, right? Samatvam yoga uchyate. Equanimity is the highest form of yoga, to reach the state of equanimity. And this equanimity, we must mark these words. This equanimity is not a mental fortitude. Because there are people who are mentally very strong. So they may have no desires, no expectations. They may have reached a sense of equanimity. But that sense of equanimity may be because of their mental strength, mental fortitude. But mental fortitude alone is not what Sri Aurobindo is referring to here. I face earth's happenings with an equal soul. Because here we are talking about a spiritual equanimity. A spiritual equanimity is when the same disturbances which the person with a mental fortitude is able to deal with great silence and with no reactions, but the one who has reached the spiritual silence, the difference is that it is on a spiritual acceptance of life as a gift from the divine, which is different from keeping quiet because you have mental strength. It is a spiritual acceptance of all happenings, all circumstances of life as a gift from the divine without any personal preferences or desires of any kind. It's like a complete submission, surrender to the divine. In fact, talking of surrender, even Islam, in its crux, Islam too stands for complete surrender, complete submission, a glad acceptance of all circumstances as if they are coming from the divine in all his benevolence. And therefore, it is the best. Whatever is happening is the best at that moment. The mother also always said, whatever is happening is the best that could happen in the present circumstances. So the poem goes, I face earth's happenings with an equal soul. In all are heard thy steps. So, in all the circumstances of life, the poet actually experiences the divine leading him from the front. He can see, he can experience the steps of the divine as if the divine is in front and he's leading. And so, whatever circumstance is happening, it's like the divine opens the next door and that circumstance happens. And then the divine opens the next door and that circumstance happens. So, we stop blaming human beings for the circumstances of our life, right? I face earth's happenings with an equal soul. In all are heard thy steps, thy unseen feet tread destiny's pathways in my front. The poet has a direct experience of being led by the unseen steps of the divine towards his God led destiny. Tread destiny's pathways in my front. The poet experiences the steps of the divine unfolding every circumstance that's happening in life. Whatever circumstances, he doesn't understand why they are happening. Because of his complete surrender to the divine, he's able to take those circumstances as a gift of the divine. And he says, yes, God, lead me on. Lead me towards my destiny. that destiny which thou hast written for me. Tread destiny's pathways in my front. Tread destiny's pathways in my front. Life's whole tremendous theorem is thou complete. Does anybody remember the theorems that we used to study in school? There used to be something that is given, point this. And then we had to work our way through and then prove whatever was given to us to be proven. But we had to accept those points which were given. Here we can come to reference 5. A mutual debt binds man to the Supreme. His nature we must put on as he put ours. We are sons of God and must be even as he. His human portion, we must grow divine. Our life is a paradox with God for key. See, a mutual debt binds man to the Supreme. Mutual debt means he has a debt towards us and we have a debt towards him. He has put on our nature. How has he put on our nature? Today, whatever imperfect nature that you see of ours, it is he, the soul, which is God himself, Purnamada Purnamidam. That Purna has put on this imperfect nature. So, his nature we must put on as he put ours. As he's put on our nature, we must be able to transform this outer nature and become of his nature. Madbhava Magataha. We are sons of God. Amritasya Putraha. We are sons of God and must be even as he. His human portion. So we have two portions. We have one that being inside us, which is perfect. We did the dual being now. That is inside us, which is perfect, which is him. But we have a human portion also. This human body, this vital body, this mental body. And all the three, this human portion, we must grow divine. We'll read this again. A mutual debt binds man to the Supreme. His nature we must put on as he put ours. We are sons of God and must be even as he. His human portion, we must grow divine. Our life is a paradox with God for key. Sri Aurobindo, Savitri, Book 1, Canto 6, page 66. So, all the mysteries of life, all the unanswered questions, all the unanswered doubts, why me? Why did this happen to me? All these will get resolved only by one hypothesis. Like in a theorem, we get hypothesis. There is only one hypothesis, the hypothesis of God. Just as a theorem is proved on the basis of self-evident axioms, right? That this is given, this is given, this is given, this you have to take granted. So just as a theorem is proved on the basis of self-evident axioms, similarly, life's mystery gets resolved by the assumption of the supreme being orchestrating the entire drama. We move forward, the door opens, and the circumstance happens. Who can we blame for that circumstance? There is nobody to blame. It is only to be accepted as a gift from the divine. Right? You remember that sports person Arthur Ashe or Ashe, whatever he's called. So he was a famous tennis player, and he contracted AIDS because of a infected blood transfusion. So when his fans said, "Why did it happen to you, Arthur? Why to you? Why such a disaster should happen to him?" He wrote this, "Why me?" Reference 6. He said, "The world over, 50 million children start playing tennis. 5 million learn to play tennis. Out of those 5 million, 500,000 learn professional tennis. Out of those 500,000, 50,000 come into the circuit. And out of that, only 5,000 reach the Grand Slam. Out of the 5,000 who reach Grand Slam, 50 reach Wimbledon. And out of the 50 who reach Wimbledon, 4 reach the semi-final and 2 reach the finals. And Arthur Ashe asked his supporters and his fans, he said, when I was holding a cup of the finals in Wimbledon, then I didn't ask God, why have you chosen me for this? So today, when I'm in pain and I have AIDS because of a mistake done by the medical community, I should not be asking God, why me? This too is part of his grand plan. He could see the signature of God in all the circumstances of his life. Isn't that beautiful? So you see, as I said earlier, the fundamental difference between Sri Aurobindo and the Vedic rishis is just this, that the latter did not, maybe they knew, but they never stated clearly that the divine has a grand plan. That there is a plan, and that plan has been written, Yatha Tathya Torthan Vyadadat Shashwatibhya Samabhya Ishavasya Upanishad. Remember? So the divine has a grand plan, and which is to manifest or bring into operation that supramental consciousness, which will be not little different. Consciousness is different from the matter. So, see, matter is inanimate. From there came life, came mind. But look at the difference. What matter was and what animal consciousness became. What animal consciousness is, what our mental consciousness is. So the gap between our consciousness and the supramental consciousness is wide, is huge, right? So we finished the first verse. I'll reread it just in case you have a question. Then we'll proceed to the second verse. I face earth's happenings with an equal soul. In all are heard thy steps, thy unseen feet tread destiny's pathways in my front. Life's whole tremendous theorem is thou complete. No danger can perturb my spirit's calm. No danger can perturb my spirit's calm. My acts are thine. I do thy works and pass. In this context, the word danger stands for failure. Failure in works that are undertaken by the poet. Here the poet is saying that he does not experience any fear of failure. Any fear of failure no longer disturbs him or upsets him because the calm of his soul has established itself. The mind has established itself in the soul. The vital being has established itself in the soul. Because the work that he has to do, that he is doing with no personal motivation. He's not doing it because he has to gain this or that out of that work. It is done as a carrying out of a mission, an assignment which is allotted to him by the divine. So Sri Aurobindo says that he dispassionately does the divine work and he moves on. He moves involving himself with result. And because he's not anxious about the results, no danger can perturb my spirit's calm. He's not thinking about the fruit of the action. He's only focusing on the action and how that action can be made as perfect as can be. No danger can perturb my spirit's calm. My acts are thine. I do thy works and pass. And why does the poet not feel the fear of failure? Because he feels the arms of the divine cradling him, nurturing him, nourishing him. Does a child ever feel fear? No, because he's in the arms of his mother. He knows she's protecting me. Similarly, Sri Aurobindo feels the cradle of the divine's arms. Says, I have no fear of failure. For example, a postman delivers a letter to whichever home he goes to. He doesn't wait to see whether when the letter is opened, what will be the result on the person who receives it, on the recipient. He just delivers the letters dispassionately and moves forward. So, no danger can perturb my spirit's calm. My acts are thine. I do thy works and pass. Failure is cradled on thy deathless arm. A half bent arm is compared to a cradle, which is the symbol of safety, security for a young child. In this line, the poet says that just your presence, O divine, all just your presence makes me feel so assured, so smug, so comfortable, and therefore I do not feel any fear of failure. I feel so secure in your arms. Deathless arms means in your immortal arms. Failure might still be there, but that failure no longer causes any anxiety to the poet. It has no adverse effect on the poet. Failure is cradled on thy deathless arm. Victory is thy passage, mirrored in fortune's glass. Just look at the English. Similarly, what the world terms as victory or success is sensed by the poet as the divine's movement or passage through the channel of his work. He says that whenever I have success, I know that you have moved there, and your passage through the channel of work is being mirrored. It's being mirrored on what? On fortune's glass. So victory for Sri Aurobindo is only God's reflection in the mirror of so-called fortune. So he's not ascribing the victory to himself. He's not pruning his feathers and feeling like a peacock. Oh, I have got victory. Oh, I'm loved so much. None of that. Because he sees victory as a passage of the divine and the divine reflecting in fortune's glass. For Sri Aurobindo, victory belongs only and only to the divine, and he does not ascribe it to his own initiative or effort. Right? See how close this is to the Karma Yoga, the renunciation of the fruit. In the beginning, we have to make an effort. Here, it has already been done. He says the victory is yours. Failure is cradled by you. What am I to worry about? It is we who see victory and failure as different events in our life. But the real way to look at victory and failure is that the divine is using our earthly body. He is using our earthly. He has a plan. More we flow. See, when there's a surfer and he's surfing, when he's when he flows, surfs with the waves, he's able to be successful. But when he tries to go against the waves, he crashes. So when we go flow along with the divine's plan, then everything is smooth sailing. And this grand plan of his transcends all failures and all victories. We'll read this again, the second verse, and then move to the third. No danger can perturb my spirit's calm. My acts are thine. I do thy works and pass. Failure is cradled on thy deathless arm. Victory is thy passage, mirrored in fortune's glass. Now the third verse. He says, in this rude combat with the fate of man, in this rude combat, it's like a struggle, a fight with our own fate. In this rude combat with the fate of man, thy smile within my heart makes all my strength. Sri Aurobindo is spearheading man's struggle against the resistance of the inconscient. See, the battle that we are all fighting is actually a battle of evolution, where the work has to be done that we evolve to the next level. But there's so much resistance from matter. Look at our own body, for instance. What is happening? We are doing an hour of walking every day, an hour of exercise, pranayam, eating the right kind of food, because this body resists all kind of good healthy practices, and we have to push this body to do exercise. We have to push this body to go in for walking. We have to push this body to do pranayam. We have to dull our sense of taste to eat healthy food. So it's a combat, it's a daily combat in this rude combat with the fate of man. See, it's an extremely difficult task to evolve. But what gives the poet his sustenance and his strength to persist and persist is the smiling face of God within him. That smiling face of God, which he feels the presence, which he experiences the presence of all the time. There is, we don't have to show the reference, I'll just read it out. Sri Aurobindo, in one of his sonnets, in the battle, he says, I am full of wounds and the fight is merciless. I'm full of wounds. Merciless. Is it? No. I'm tired. I'm fighting all the time. The fight is merciless. When will thy hour of victory come? So, in this rude combat with the fate of my man, thy smile within my heart makes all my strength. Thy force in me labors at its grandiose plan, indifferent to the time snake's crawling length. Oh, time snake's crawling length. What does this phrase refer to? It refers to this very slow pace of evolution. Just as a snake slithers at an extremely slow pace, sometimes it moves forward and sometimes it takes a circuitous path. So it's not only slow, it also goes on a very circuitous path. So similarly, time in evolution is moving at a very slow pace. And therefore, the poetry is indifferent to the time snake's crawling length. So, this evolution of consciousness also moves at a very slow pace. And sometimes it appears to regress. But when it regresses, it only regresses to assimilate and move to the next level of evolution. We've talked about evolution earlier, and this eventually leads to progress. For example, Sri Aurobindo has always given the example of an army. An army has taken over some land and moved ahead. And the army moves ahead. People of that land try to take that land back. So the army has to come back and assimilate its victory, make sure the victory is established, reaffirms, puts more soldiers to guard its land, and then moves ahead. Even in a long jump, and we have to do the long jump, we go back a little and then we take the jump. So in these two lines, Sri Aurobindo says that he is only an instrument. He is only a tool in the hands of God. And this is God's force through him is working out his own grand plan. And the poet clearly experiences the divine using him as an instrument to work out his own plan. And since God is indifferent, whether it is a slow pace or it's a fast pace of evolution, He is in no hurry to reach his destination. So, because the poet has become a pure instrument of the divine, even the poet has become indifferent to the slow and winding movement of time. In brief, he too is not in a hurry because God does not relish easy victories and walkovers. Sri Aurobindo's words, not mine. God does not relish easy victories and walkovers. Actually, the work of the evolution of consciousness is anyway not something that can be done in a rush. Even to transform a small weakness in us, a habit that has been formed, to change it, how difficult it is. So, how can we talk about evolution of consciousness happening at a fast pace? It took billions and billions and billions of years for even the most elementary life, the unicellular life, the amoeba to appear. Millions of years. And from inanimate to animate, and then to reach human consciousness, it took years and years and years of struggle. How much struggle against what? Against the hard crust of habit. Then one can imagine what a long and arduous task it will be to be able to transform human consciousness fully into the divine consciousness. Mad bhavam agata. We have to become his natured. To become that, it's going to take time. Give yourself that time. And that has to be done consciously by the conscious individual. Thus, God is indifferent to the time that this evolution of consciousness will take. His grand plan involves a very slow baking of the jar of consciousness. So we'll read the third verse again and proceed to the last two lines. If there are any questions, please ask. In this rude combat with the fate of man, thy smile within my heart makes all my strength. I can experience that smile all the time. Thy force in me labors at its grandiose plan, indifferent to the time snake's crawling length. No power can slay my soul. It lives in thee. Thy presence is my immortality. The soul within us is immortal. It is indestructible. Why? Because it is a portion of the Supreme. It is the Supreme Himself. Even using the word portion is wrong because it's not like a cake which has been cut. It is the whole of the divine has become the soul. The whole of the divine has become all the souls. Right? The soul lives in the Supreme. When He says, it lives in thee, no power can slay my soul, it lives in thee. It means that the soul partakes of the nature of the Supreme because it is the Supreme Himself. That Purna has become this Purna. So there is no difference between the two. It lives in thee, it partakes of thy nature. My soul is of the same nature as your soul and the same nature as Him. Reference 8. Mamae vansho jiva loke, jiva bhutah sanatana. Sri Krishna says to Arjuna that it is an eternal portion of me that becomes the jiva in the world of living creatures. Thy presence is my immortality. Has become that presence of the immortal within him. And he's also conscious that that soul is his true self, that he is that soul. He was that soul in the past life and the life before that and the life before that. And he is the soul in this life and he will continue the journey as the soul in many other bodies later on. So because he's conscious of the presence of the soul and his identity with the soul, therefore, he says that the presence of the divine within constitutes his immortality. No power can slay my soul. My soul cannot be overtaken by anything. it lives in thee. Thy presence is my immortality. Are there any questions, or should we just meditate for a minute to let it soak before we take any questions? Let us just do half a minute's meditation or 1 minute's meditation. So if anybody has any questions, you can unmute yourself.
Can you please explain these two lines again?
Which ones?
Second stanza ka the last two. Failure is
Cradle
cradled by deathless
on-
arm. Victory is thy passage, mirrored in fortune's glass. Yeah.
So when we do some work and we do it for reaching somewhere, for reaching some goal, and the goal is very important for us and we want that goal, then victory and failure become very important for us because we are stationed in the result. But for the poet who's become a sthita pragya, victory and failure do not matter to him anymore because he sees the divine moving towards his grandiose plan. There is a divine who's moving towards his plan. And so the poet sees that every failure that he goes through in life, he's actually being cradled by the divine in his deathless arm, in his immortal arm.
Okay.
He's being like a child is nurtured in a mother's arms. Similarly, the poet feels that when he has failures, he experiences the divine nurturing him, loving him in his cradled arms. And victory doesn't see it as my victory. When he experiences a victory, he sees the divine's footsteps ahead. And he says, it is thy victory. It is thy presence which is actually being mirrored in fortune's glass. In fortune's mirror, I'm seeing thee. Because you were walking that path, it is being called a victory. But it is actually only thee and only thee. Yeah?
Yeah.
Clear?
Yeah. And slay my soul. Slay means
Mona ma'am,
last.
Chitva henam.
that
Chitva.
second chapter covers one that my soul cannot be slain by water.
Jayate mriyate vakadachit.
That my soul can neither be burned by fire.
Acha, nainam chiddanti shastrani.
Nainam chiddanti. Yeah.
Okay.
So no power can slay my soul. Why?
Okay.
Because it lives in thee, Mani. It shares the same presence that you are because it is you only.
Okay.
My soul and you may koi, there's no difference. The Purna has become this Purna.
Okay.
So it lives in thee.
Okay.
Thy presence is my immortality because you are within me. That is why I can say, I am immortal. Right? I'm immortal because you are there within me.
So Anjali, when you read this poem for the first time, did someone explain this to you? You just understood it on your own.
So this is before I met Kirit uncle. I met somebody called Professor Kandaswamy. I mean, I was going from one Swami to the other, and I was not happy because I did not like this whole Maya business at all. It didn't go down my gullet. And so I met this English professor called Professor Kandaswamy, who was not a Swami. English professor who used to come to my sister's mother-in-law. She was doing her PhD in the spark of humor in PG Woodhouse. So something, you know how the soul calls out? Something within me said that he may have some answers. So I asked my sister's mother-in-law, she says, you are looking for only spiritual people. He's an English professor. I've studied with him for 20 years. There's no spirituality. Pankha chala dena. There's no spirituality in him. It is only English. So he won't satisfy you. I said, no, Mosiji, I want to meet him. So he had a guru, Sita Raman. So his guru had explained 4 or 5 poems and he had published a book. So he read this poem for the first time, and he read his guru's words that he had written to explain this poem. So for that 1 year, I only read this poem and Sita Ramanji's explanation of it. And yeah, it was अपने आप कहाँ कुछ समझ आता पहले. Not possible, because the whole background was very Swamiji oriented. So there was too much Maya in the head, which my head was not accepting, but that Maya was there. And all my questions were related to that.
Sitaramanji was a disciple of Sri Aurobindo.
Of Sri Aurobindo, yeah.
Oh, okay, all right.
And he had gone into it become like into solitude. He'd gone into a room that he would not meet anybody now. And before that, he had published this book.
He is still alive?
I don't know, because once I went to Kirit Uncle, I forgot about all.
Okay.
Otherwise, I've been to Pondicherry so many times, I should have at least looked for him and given him my gratitude, because after this, I met Kirit Uncle, and then the journey was too beautiful.
Yeah. Okay.
Not that circumstances change, Sarita. Circumstances remain the same, maybe more difficult. More and more and more grinding. They grind you like you're in a washing machine, And if you have a support system, like an answer like what Sri Aurobindo is given through Letters on Yoga, through all his books, then you know that all this is being done with a purpose. It's not purposeless grinding. Even the clothes which go through the tumble of the washing machine, they know there's a purpose. I'm going to be cleaned. So that when you understand that purpose, then you go through the grinding with some idea ki kuch, so it's leading to something. Remember that story I used to tell? I love that story. Is there time or everybody's in a hurry? It's 4:15.
No, please carry on.
No? I've said this story many times, but I love it. So the story goes that there's a grandson and a grandfather, and the grandfather is all the time reading the Bhagavad Gita, sitting by the fireplace in some cold mountainous area. So the grandson is a little child, 7, 8 years old. He says, whatever you are reading, I also want to read. So the grandfather passes on a Bhagavad Gita for children. As he grows a little older into teenage years, he gives him another Bhagavad Gita for the higher level. Finally, he gives him Sri Aurobindo. Now, when the boy is around 16, he comes to his grandfather near the fireplace and he says, look, Grandpa, I've read this for almost 10 years, but I'm not seeing any change in myself. So what's the point of having read it for 10 years or 12? And you for maybe 50 years? He says, I'll answer your question later. This basket which is carrying the coal and the wood for the fireplace, just turn all the wood into the fireplace, and you take this basket to the river and fill water in it and get it. He says, how can I fill water in a basket? He says, you just do what I'm telling you. And he sends him to the river. He fills water. He comes, but by the time he comes, the water is already gone out through the holes in the basket. He says, grandson, you didn't do a good job. Get water in the basket. Go again. And so he goes on sending him back once, twice, thrice, till the boy gets frustrated because he's now become 16 years old and he knows the futility. So around the 5th time, he says, Grandpa, I'm not doing this anymore, Dadaji. Why are you making me do this? Getting water in a basket, it can't come. He says, look at the basket. Do you see a change? He says, it's sparkling. It has become what it was originally. Originally, it was a shining basket. It has become that. He says, when we read the Bhagavad Gita over and over, over and over, over and over again, or other spiritual literature again and again and again, what happens is that the soul, the light of the soul, starts emanating from our physical, from our vital, from our mental, from our spiritual being, because it's all covered by layers of ego and desire and all the other anomalies of physical body. Yeah. that. So
Anjali, you had told us this was the first story that you told us in our third class when we had just started the Gita. And the
like,
third class, this was the first time you told us a story. I've written the date also, 7/6/2014.
wow, 6 years
Yeah,
back.
yeah, the first story you ever told us. Yeah, but this is
Oh,
really
how do you
a
access your
difference.
notes so easily?
No, but that
How
is
do
not the point. The point is that the story was the first one that you had. It's very special to us, you know.
okay. I love this story
Yeah. Yeah.
because when you imagine and visualize that as we are doing all this, reading this, understanding that, trying to what is actually happening is really something happening. So the parat safa, the layers are being cleaned so that the inner soul, the light of the soul can actually,
And कितने जन्मों का परत है.
हाँ, yeah, yeah,
While you were
nice.
talking about the poem, that one more story that was coming into my mind, which you have said earlier, was about Hanumanji writing the Ramayana.
Oh, that was so beautiful. That's
That
also
about the
about
divine
so,
worker. Yeah, maybe you can share that. That also
yeah,
with the whole
sure.
sonnet today. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was Hanumanji had written the Ramayana, and who else had written the Ramayana?
Tulsidas ji had
Tulsidas.
written.
हाँ.
Yeah.
Valmiki ji, Valmiki ji.
Acha,
Valmiki.
okay,
The
okay.
Tulsi came much later. So Hanumanji was in love with Ram. Everybody knows Sri Ram. So he was writing the story of the Ramayana on those birch, the tree barks and all. And he went on writing and writing and his surrender was of what level? Even Sri Ram has said that even Lakshman has not been able to reach that level of surrender that Hanuman has reached. You can imagine what level his poetry must have been, the Ramayana. And when he was done, he met Valmiki, Rishi Valmiki. And he said, what, I've written the story of Sri Ram. So would you like to read it? And Rishi Valmiki, when he read it, because Rishi Valmiki was in touch with Sri Ram, with Hanumanji, otherwise how could he have written something so beautiful? So when he read it, he said his face fell. And Hanumanji said that, why has your face fallen? Are you reading the story of Ram, your beloved? He said, you know what? I have also parallelly written the story of Ram. But yours is so beautiful, so beautiful, so beautiful that mine nobody will read after reading yours. So Hanumanji said, so no problem. I had written it in love of Sri Ram. That love is mine, it's inside me. And he ate up all the banana leaves. He just ate them up. They were banana leaves. For him, it was nothing. And he said, no, let your story be powerful because that's what you have written it for, that the world gets it. For me, it was just an expression of my love for Sri Ram. It's over. I've expressed it. And similarly, Lord Chaitanya written some very beautiful poetry. I don't remember the topic. And his very dear friend had written on the same topic another poem. And both of them were going in a boat. And he said that, would you like to listen to my poem, my writing? And the friend said, sure. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu read it out. And his friend started bawling, crying. And again, the same reason that yours is so beautiful. Nobody will ever look at mine. Nobody will ever read mine. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he said, I wrote it in love of Krishna. So मेरे को तो कोई फर्क ही नहीं पड़ता. He just took the pieces of paper and just threw them into the river. He said, मैं अर्पण करता हूँ आपको. Let your poetry become famous. And one wonders what the world has missed, what he must have written. That was so, so beautiful. So that, nice, no?
Beautiful, Anjali. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Thanks. Thank you.
So I
In
think,
fact, Anjali, your last line,
uh,
it reaffirms that what we all talk about, I don't think it can ever be a Maya or an illusion because it is so real. This
Yeah.
wholeness of the divine can never be treated as an illusion. It may be just
Yes.
veiled as an ignorance.
Yes.
But
Exactly.
this that last line which says, "In thy immortality," I mean,
Thy presence is my
is my
immortality.
immortality. How can you even imagine? I mean, that's what I'm saying. How can we ever think that this is an illusion?
Yes, exactly. And that is why when I reached, after 1 year of preparation, when I reached Kirit Uncle, my first question was somewhat like this. My first question when I went to him and I said that I don't understand. I said, I understand there is oneness. Mentally, I understand oneness. But in that oneness, I don't understand the multiplicity, the difference. Because the oneness, I can't say I experience it, or maybe I just understand it mentally. But I don't understand the multiplicity, the difference in the oneness. Because according to the Swamis that I'd gone to, there is only oneness. There is no multiplicity. The multiplicity is an illusion. And then he gave me the two verses of Isha Upanishad. And they answered every question of mine, the sixth and seventh. सर्वाणि भूतानि मानं ततो न विजुगुप्सते यस्मिन् सर्वाणि भूतानि आत्मै वाभूद्विजानत तत्र को मोहः कः शोक एकत्वमनुपश्यत. So he explained that oneness, and then he explained the multiplicity in the oneness, and how the divine has become the multiple because there is only one, but that one has become multiple. So the multiplicity, just like when we read that passage of Life Divine in the last poem that we did, that if gold has become many ornaments, in the ornaments the gold has not lost its goldness. You can't say because the ornaments are temporary and they can be broken into something else, so they are an illusion. The divine has chosen to become something that is mortal, but he is still the immortal in the mortal. That thought was,
That's what actually this one just does it.
yeah, this that passage from Sri Aurobindo's Life Divine was a very clinching passage. And this example that Sri Aurobindo gives, that just, and because this is the example that Adi Shankara gives, gold is gold, but when it becomes an ornament, they can be changed. They are changeable. This ornament can be melted and can be made into another ornament. So Adi Shankara says that they are impermanent and gold is permanent. So that which is permanent and unchangeable is God. That which is changeable and impermanent is not God. So that Sri Aurobindo broke the myth. He says, no, the unchangeable decided to become the changeable.
I'm saying what you're explaining, this comes in the Bhagavad Gita in that Dvavimau Purushau Loke, Sharashtakshar Evacha, Sharasarvani Bhutani, Kutasthakshar Uchyate. So the Purusha is there in both, in the Shara and in the Akshara.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And we can't say that if he is
yeah.
in the Akshara, in the
And
Akshara, that he is not there
yeah,
or he
yeah,
is less there.
yeah.
He is equally there
Equally,
as he is in the equally,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And not equally. Then Sri Aurobindo explains this in the Life Divine. He says when we use the term equally, then it becomes a figure of measurement. But he cannot be measured. So we have to use the word totally. So there is no measurement. He is as much here as he is there. He's totally here and totally there. Purnamada,
Wholly.
Purnamidam. Don't use the word equally also, because there also there is a measurement.
Yeah.
He says use the word
Wholly.
totally, completely,
Wholly.
wholly. Yes. Nice. That's such a beautiful concept getting cleared. Feel like some cobwebs going away from the head. Nice. Sure, window is amazing. Liked it, Archana ma'am?
Yes, ma'am. I am blessed that I got to hear these things from you. Today's session was special for us, ma'am. How we waited for this.
I'm so
And
sorry for
actually,
all the Yeah. Now I'm going to be keeping a long gap. Diwali coming and lots of stuff, lots of things to do. So after Diwali, we'll resume. We'll do God.
So much, ma'am. It was lovely.
We'll do
Thy
God.
smile within my heart makes all my dreams. This is our
I know.
takeaway.
I love that. I just love that line.
This is our
Thy
takeaway,
smile
ma'am.
within my heart makes all my strength. I think that was part of our last poem, was it? Sometime we've done it. Any other comments or
And let me see that again. That smile within my heart.
makes all my strength. Now I'm not with a great memory. So I don't remember which poem it is. Anita, you can look it up fast.
This
Thy
only.
smile within my heart makes all my strength.
Third verse, ma'am.
Is it the dual being?
No, ma'am. Divine worker only.
Oh, right. Abhi to kiya hai, what's wrong with me? Yeah, it's the third verse, third stanza, second line. Really, something's wrong with me. In this rude combat with the fate of man, thy smile within my heart makes all my strength. Thy force in me labors at its grandiose plan, indifferent to the time snake's crawling length.
And we suffer because we forget.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And look at the poetry. Time snake's crawling length, the slow speed at which evolution is going on. Beautiful. What is Simta saying? That she gets a little sweet caress from you.
No, Mama is just enjoying the sentence that you just read. So that's
It's such a beautiful sentence, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, it's a meditative sentence. Thy smile within my heart makes all my. Now one can sit down in meditation just on this one sentence and just see him smiling. One can sit down in meditation just seeing him dancing on her head and the magic dust falling. There are so many ways to meditate. So many beautiful ways. You know? Happy Diwali.
Happy Diwali to everyone.
Happy Diwali to everyone.
Happy Diwali.